So when we originally came up with the title for this webinar, we had to come up with it before we actually went to the event. And now that we went to the event, we would change the title. And I think you guys will see why as we go through the content here. So this is Chris speaking, and then Mike is here in the room with me as well. He'll help out with Q&A at the end. Feel free to email us if you would like to. So real quick, before we get into the content, this is a view of the syndicated research that the telecom group at TBR produces. And there's a bunch of people on this call that have full access to this research. Folks that don't but would like access, you can reach out after the webinar and we can look into setting that up for you. But basically, we have research off the shelf around 5G, 6G, edge computing, private networks, hyperscalers, operators, vendors, a variety of different topics. AI's in there as well. And we also do a variety of custom work for clients. So with that, we're going to start with the agenda. We're going to start off with an overview and setting the stage. Then we're going to talk about the good things we heard, the bad things we heard or saw, and the ugly things. And I did this format last year for MWC 24, and it wound up being the case where this format also works really well for the MWC 25 content. So I think you guys will see why as we go through the content here. And we're going to leave off with what this means for the telecom industry. So to set the stage, if we look at the event metrics, what we see here is that the attendance to the event was very healthy. It was the second highest ever in MWC history at around 109,000 people. There were more than 200 countries and territories globally represented. So almost every country and territory in the world was represented at this event. And there were around 2,900 exhibitors, sponsors, and partners. That's an all-time high number. Also, the distribution of people that attended the event, more than 50% of them are people that are outside of the core network ecosystem, if you will. So enterprise representatives, chip makers, there were a whole variety of consultancies, even beyond the usual names that we always see at the event. So there was a very diverse group of people from all over the world, all kinds of companies, including people from the public sector. So on the surface, everything looks good. We have strong attendance, records in some cases. However, when we listen to the keynotes and, have our discussions with executives, et cetera, in one-to-one or group setting meetings, it painted a bit of a different picture. And you guys will see what we're talking about in a bit. But first, what we saw and heard a lot of at the event. So this is more of the surface level stuff. We saw a lot about, or heard a lot about 5G standalone. Operators still very behind with that, but some progress being made. AI was all over the place. AI was actually one of the good things that came out of the event, I think, and we're going to talk more about that in a bit. Automation as well. There's a lot of activity going on at the telcos for automation. Cloud transformation has slowed a bit, especially on the network function side, but on the IT side, it still continues on. If anything, it's ramping up across more telcos globally. We saw a lot of satellite-related things. Companies there, Starlink had a very prominent booth there. All the other usual players in the satellite ecosystem were represented at the event. Open RAN was talked about. As we know, Open RAN has not delivered on the promises, and it is extremely slow going in terms of commercial implementation of the technology. Private networks, we continued to hear a lot about private networks. However, the profitability and the high fragmentation in the market creates a situation where scalable ROI is challenging to attain. And this is something where vendors are trying to see how this all plays out. Is there going to be some consolidation? Is there going to be some big catalyst moments to drive investment? And we're going to come back to that topic in a bit. Regulation was a big talk in the event, and especially as it pertains to Europe and how regulation is constricting innovation and development of the economy in Europe, bringing it into the 21st century in terms of technological innovation and implementing that at large scale in that society. And then lastly is sustainability. Still has some traction in terms of talk tracks baked into product features. Energy usage and optimization of energy usage was a big theme. Some other things we heard about and saw quite a bit about was metaverse. And I didn't list it here, but I think it's worth noting that AR/VR is going to be a big deal in the future. And we saw a significant broadening of AR/VR devices and use cases that were shown at the event, much more than we saw last year. Significant difference compared to last year. And I think that shows that this whole concept of AR/VR, I would not count that out in any way. I think it's going to make a big comeback as networks are developed and there's technologies that make AR/VR experiences something that people are willing to pay for. I do have wearables there. So that included the headsets and also connected vehicles. We saw a lot of that. So I want to start off with the good. So AI and FWA were two positive developments from the event. And these remain some of the largest and most impactful opportunities for the telecom industry. So specifically on AI, one thing we noticed at the event is that there's meat on the bone this year. There's use cases that are reaching sophisticated levels. They are being implemented in some level of scale in commercial operations at some telcos. And they are starting to deliver some business outcomes. So still early days for Gen AI and how that comes into the telco and transforms the telco, but we saw a lot of sophistication, especially on the OSS/BSS side. And then on the call center side, we saw a lot of things there. Most of it's going to be for churn reduction and boosting subscriber, experience, and maybe for upsell, cross-sell opportunities. So there might be some aspect of revenue, incremental revenue generation there, leveraging AI. So there's a lot of promising developments that we heard about that. Taken together, though, it's really about cost reduction. The telcos are looking at AI to do a significant, I would call it a step function change or order of magnitude change in the cost model for the telcos. And over time, we're going to see AI come into not only the call center and the OSS/BSS stack, we're going to see it transform the network operations as well. It's early days, but you can start to see how these things could come together in the future and how telcos could do the next wave of cost reduction in their businesses. The thing about AI too is that it straddles all departments, all functional areas of the telcos. So sales department, marketing, back office IT functions, the network, even down to the radio layer. You can use AI in all of those places in various ways. And just the sheer number of demos and ideas that are floating around is very significant. And there's tremendous potential. So call center and OSS/BSS are the top areas where we see activity today. And when I say activity, I mean resources allocated working on stuff. We see telco spending on these areas at a much higher level than they are spending in other areas. But sales, marketing, and network network domains are all going to feature more prominently going forward. It's just that we're seeing telcos, or at an industry level, we're seeing call center and what we consider to be customer lifecycle management domains. That's really the sweet spot right now for leveraging Gen AI and agentic AI. New revenue is going to come from customer upsell and cross-sell, but also there's an opportunity for data center interconnect. And in countries that are going to do sovereign cloud, sovereign AI, there might be an opportunity to do GPU as a service from a telco perspective. So there's some opportunities for revenue for telcos. I wouldn't say it's a dramatic opportunity, but it's definitely going to be an incremental opportunity for the telcos, especially in certain countries. The other positive thing we heard at MWC was FWA. And as you know, if you've been on our webinars before, we are extremely bullish on FWA, and that is not changing. It's not going to change. We continue to see technological advancement in terms of leveraging sub-6 and millimeter wave spectrum, also unlicensed spectrum, to do FWA and to provide fiber-like experiences to end users. Time to market for FWA is way faster than doing FTTP. The customer experience for people that use FWA today is generally good. People are happy with the service. They're happy about the price for value of FWA. And we firmly believe, and this is baked into our projections, in our market forecasts, et cetera, for our projections are actually a little bit higher still than what the industry has recently revised theirs to. So if you look at things like the Ericsson Mobility Report and some of the GSMA research that comes out, our numbers are a little higher. We think that the opportunity is actually larger than what they continue to forecast, based on some of the indicators that we see in terms of customer trends, customer sentiment, when we look at price for value, when we look at NPS score, when we look at the actual satisfaction of the service, when we look at the dynamics of fixed access in different countries, we remain extremely bullish about this technology. So I want to build out that idea a little bit more. Telcos are underestimating the opportunity. So if we move beyond T-Mobile, Verizon, and the Indian operators, if we exclude them from the bunch, the rest of the telcos are very much underestimating the opportunity here. And they really need to take a look at this, because some of them are going to get blindsided from a competitive standpoint. And they really need to take FWA more seriously. This is very important. We are seeing, for the operators that I just mentioned, T-Mobile, Verizon, and the Indian operators especially, FWA drives billions of dollars in annual revenue for those companies. Billions in top-line revenue. That is new revenue. It's scalable revenue. It's ROI positive revenue. This is a good business for the telcos to get into, provided they have the appropriate spectrum composition to do something like this. And then I do want to stress technological innovations. We continue to see innovation. We continue to see reasons why FWA using 5G is acting like wireless fiber. There's a roadmap. It's going to help with optimization for spectral efficiency. It's going to help with dealing with non-line of sight situations. It's going to deal with propagation limitations of millimeter wave, et cetera. We see innovation across the board from a variety of vendors. And we also see some upstart telcos or ISPs, WISPs, some people call them, where they're leveraging some of those technologies and they are taking some share in their markets. And again, some of these technologies mitigate some of the spectrum issues that we have traditionally heard about where people who are naysayers about FWA say there's just not enough spectrum to do it. Quite frankly, that's just not true. T-Mobile has and Verizon have many millions of consumers and business customers already on those platforms, and they have spare capacity to do many millions more. And that's just 2 telcos. So there is significant opportunity here. I really want to stress that point. Okay, I want to transition now to the bad and the ugly. So if we could boil down the gist of the keynotes and what we heard at the event, in the keynotes and in some of the one-to-one and group meetings that we had with companies, if I could boil it down to one word, that word would be warning. And if anybody's read the special report that we wrote about Mobile World Congress, that is the front and center takeaway from that report. And I think Haley has made it available on the platform here, and it'll also be sent out to all of you after this session is over. The warning is multifold. The telecom industry has been moving too slowly. There's disruption risk growing. There's a macroeconomic picture that's deteriorating from trade issues, geopolitics, unresolved war conflicts, et cetera. And the industry is at a level of uncertainty that I would argue it has not seen in its 150-year history of telecom. So we're at a major catalyst moment now. And unfortunately, the telcos are not prepared for this. Most telcos are not prepared for this. So I want to unpack that a little bit more. So telcos' ambitions are not matching reality. There's been a lot of talk about transformation and, you know, cloud network functions and cloud native and 5G SA with network slicing, yada, yada. And the reality is that the vast majority of telcos are nowhere near delivering on any of those promises. The vast majority. This can be proven in facts in terms of how many telcos have actually started deploying 5G SA commercially versus a POC or a trial, or a lab. Like if you look at who's actually done stuff and the scope of what they've actually done in the field, you can see wide variation between the vast majority of telcos and what I would call a select few that are really at the cutting edge. So progress is too little, too late. The revenue problem, there is still no solution to this. FWA is awesome, and it is helping here, but it is not enough to recoup the total scope of investment that the telecom industry has invested so far in 5G, which is at least $300 billion globally in infrastructure and spectrum has been spent on 5G in aggregate to date. So there is apples and oranges comparison between what FWA is bringing into the table and what the telcos have actually spent already. And that gap, how does that gap get closed? There's still no solution on the horizon for that. And network APIs and network slicing, those are nowhere near the level of maturity and scope for bridging that gap. We're nowhere near it. It's not even 2 years out. Like we're talking like 5+ years out to recoup that magnitude of investment. So this is a huge issue for the telcos. The telcos are shrinking. If you take their revenues and you adjust it for inflation, and you look at the inflation-adjusted revenue for the aggregate telecom industry, telcos have been shrinking. And they have been shrinking for some time. For at least several years, they've been shrinking. We have research on this, especially for the US market. We've published some of that. We'd be happy to send over some of that research if you'd like to see it. But this is very much happening. When they report revenue, they report in nominal terms. So if they show, 1%, 2%, 3% revenue growth, that's great. But adjusted for inflation, it's either flat or it's negative in most cases. We talked about transformation. They're behind in that. What we have seen from a behavioral standpoint is cost containment, and this loops in AI, because I talked before about the step function decline in costs for telcos from AI. They kind of need AI to be what it's promised to be. They need it. Because in order for the telcos to show earnings per share growth to their shareholders, in a weak top line environment, they have to squeeze the cost side of the equation. And in order for them to get the next step function cost reduction in their operations, they must implement big picture technologies like AI. That's the only types of things that are going to do it. AI, automation, machine learning, analytics, leveraging analytics in that. That's really what they are going to need to do. And that's exactly what we're seeing leading telcos doing. We see leading telcos are really trying to get their heads around this AI opportunity across the business. We see C-level support and sponsorship. We see them bringing in management consultancy firms and other CNSI firms to have very detailed discussions, big picture, and then more on a tactical level of how do they actually do this and generate these business outcomes that they desperately need. There's a lot of traction behind the scenes on these things. Regarding the macro picture, you have cost of capital, inflation, and tariffs. The word stagflation is being thrown around more. And actually, if anybody watched Federal Reserve, U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman's speech yesterday, Powell, the biggest takeaway from his speech yesterday, from the media, the media's takeaway, is one word, and that's stagflation is here. Stagflation. And that is a pressure cooker situation for telcos, just because of the situation that they find themselves in. They don't have strong pricing power. Their growth's going to be slowing more. And the cost of capital, they're highly leveraged entities. How do they manage that situation? It's a pressure cooker situation for them. And then, of course, lastly here is the hyperscalers have disruptive tech that they're bringing into the market. If you've been on some of our other webinars, you've heard us talk about some of these things, so I'm not going to talk about it here. But one example is Starlink. Starlink is a hyperscaler as far as we're concerned. And we are starting to see them take share from some telcos in some countries. Very early days, very low numbers, but we are starting to see in the field, we are seeing some subs defect the telco or the cable co, and they're going to Starlink. So small numbers, but it's an indicator that there could be more disruption coming from that type of a use case. So we talked about areas where the telcos are not making much progress. I've already discussed this, so we're not going to belabor that. Basically, the takeaway is the status quo is not conducive to the current market environment, and something is going to have to give. And this is really what we talked about in the special report. Highly recommend people go take a look at that. I see there's a bunch of questions in the queue. Just please keep adding them in there, and we'll take them one at a time at the end. So I want to talk about the shift from the bad to the ugly. So where does this shake out? Where does this go from here? And we've done some thinking internally about what is this telecom industry going to look like once the dust settles from the trade situation, the geopolitical, those things start to calm down, maybe the end of some of these conflicts. When the dust settles, what is this going to look like? And we're going to share some of that thinking here. So we're expecting structural change in geopolitics, trade, government spending, interest rate policy, and economic development. We're expecting fundamental changes in these things. The last 15 to 20 years, what I would say post-global financial crisis, up until the end of COVID, or if we could go to the end of last year if you want, that paradigm is fundamentally changing. That means that assumptions and ways of working and the way that business decisions were conducted through that prior time period have to also fundamentally change. We expect there to be a wave of rationalization in the telecom industry. We're expecting a significant increase in M&A, both horizontal and vertical M&A. We're expecting bankruptcies. We're expecting major restructurings. And we are expecting there's going to be fewer but much larger and stronger CSPs and vendors by the end of this decade. And I want to give you one example. In Europe, depending on how you count the opcos and the subsidiaries, there is around 150 or so telcos in Europe. That is way too many. Way too many. There needs to be a fraction of that number in order to have a healthy, sustainable telecom ecosystem in Europe. That number needs to be a fraction. In order to go from that 150 or so number to a small fraction of that is going to require monumental change for the EU to digest, and for the societies of the EU member states and the satellite European states as well. This is stuff that was not on the table in the last paradigm. This is now on the table. Europe, unfortunately, is not asserting itself, hasn't been. We did see some encouraging changes. Germany, new government, spending priorities have changed, spending scope has changed. We might be at the cusp of seeing the slumbering Europe waking up from its sleepiness in the prior paradigm. And when I say sleepiness, what I'm specifically referring to is underinvestment, overregulation, kicking the can down the road, not taking certain technological innovations seriously enough and then missing the wave, and having a structurally unfavorable, non-conducive environment for stimulating economic development. Those things must change, or there's going to be big problems in Europe. And again, a lot of these things were discussed at Mobile World Congress in the keynotes and in the ministerial series and in other venues as well at the event. These very same things were actually discussed by policymakers, telcos, vendors, other stakeholders of the telecom ecosystem. Private equity was there. We heard other financial services entities were also represented at the event. We heard this messaging, this type of messaging, coming from all of those different stakeholders. We're also seeing business model disruption. We see satellite as an example of that. And then we also see new market opportunities. So there are some silver linings in this environment, not only having more healthier telcos, but also having some opportunities for incremental revenue growth. There is a list of opportunities. It's just that, are the telcos finally going to start scaling that? And is it going to turn ROI positive? Those are the big question marks. Okay, so there are some silver linings here that I really do want to point out. It is very possible that the current US administration could jolt Europe into action and finally start working together as one unified entity rather than separate appendages. And that, if Trump is what it takes to wake Europe up, then I would consider that to be a silver lining. This is a good thing for Europe. This is a positive long-term thing for Europe to go through, a process to go through. If the regulatory environment evolves as part of this, these catalyzing changes, this is a good thing. The telecom industry generally is still beholden to regulations that are decades old, that are very outdated. There needs to be more. There needs to be reform of those regulations. There needs to be a fundamental rethink of these regulations to create a healthier, more sustainable ecosystem. We might see Europe forced to allow consolidation across borders, especially. That's very important. Operators in Europe are subscale. Most of them are a tenth the size of the US tier ones or smaller, maybe 1/20th or 1/30th the size of a tier one US telco. Those are tiny telcos in Europe. Some of them are tiny. They don't have the scale. They don't have the ability to invest at the same level as telcos in other countries. Europe needs to make these structural changes. It's going to create a lot of volatility, but if you look at the long-term health of that continent in particular, this must happen. It has to happen. I also think a silver lining of this is it's going to push telcos to go deeper with transformational cost reduction solutions. So helping telcos move further down the path of zero touch, full automation, or as much automation as possible, and being full digital versus hybrid digital, which is what almost all of them are today. This is important, this journey, and that journey does need to be accelerated. If some of these negative things going on in the ecosystem is the catalyst to push this acceleration, then I would argue that is a silver lining. That's actually a good thing for the industry over the long run. So what this means for the telecom industry, we're expecting a subdued CapEx environment. Telcos are going to remain in cash flow management mode. By the way, CSP stands for Communication Service Provider. 5G advanced spend cycles likely to be underwhelming. We do expect of the CapEx that is spent, a higher portion is going to be allocated to FWA. So any vendors that are more aligned with FWA enablement, we would expect those companies to relatively outperform against this challenging backdrop. We're going to see more telcos struggling to pay their bills. We're going to see payment terms extended further. We're going to see working capital be more constrained. A lot of times telcos impose this on their providers. I would expect to see that. They're going to be managing the debt much more carefully. When debt is repaid versus rolling it over, refinancing it, we're going to see more exotic debt arrangements. We see some telcos today. I'm not going to name names, but I think everybody can think of some of these telcos out there that are always in the news, trying to find money and doing very exotic things with their debt structuring. We're going to see a lot more of that by more telcos. Vendor financing, this is something that stronger vendors, financially stronger vendors, might be able to take market share by extending vendor financing to telcos, where the telco can get maybe a lower cost of capital, a lower interest rate to pay back the cost of that infrastructure. So that's actually an opportunity for some well-positioned vendors. And largely seeing telcos shifting focus to cash management. So reducing the scope of investment. So for like fiber build programs, for example, we are seeing some telcos reassessing their fiber build programs. They're scaling them back. They're doing fewer homes passed or businesses passed because now the cost of capital is higher. They've redone their modeling, their projections, and they're saying, okay, well, now we have to do X number of home passings instead of Y number because it just doesn't make economical sense anymore for whatever reason to do that. We're seeing a lot of that on the fixed side, fixed access side especially. M&A and asset monetization. So asset monetization, so sale leaseback of real estate leveraging real estate in other ways. And these are things that telcos can do to free up capital. We've seen telcos in the US do sale leaseback of their towers. In Canada, we've seen sale leaseback of some real estate assets. And in other countries as well. In Europe, we've seen the establishment of some netcos versus servcos. These are all ways to free up capital to invest, pay down debt, pay dividends, whatever the telco needs that cash for. We've seen all of the above. So with that, we'll open it up for Q&A, and Mike's gonna join me here too. So if you hear another voice, that's his voice. So I'm gonna go through the questions here. Bear with me a second to get this set up here. All right, so the first question is, what is your take on the coverage of 6G at the event overall? So we did hear about 6G. We heard about 6G from the usual suspects. So the traditional RAN vendors. We heard about, I would say it was mostly the RAN vendors that we heard about 6G from. Mike, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, so the CSPs are not particularly interested in speaking about 6G at this point. I'd say that compared to MWC 24, we heard less about 6G at MWC 25. And it was from those RAN vendors primarily.
Okay, the next question is, do telcos old legacy data models ready to support full advantage if doing AI? I would say no. The telcos are not, the data lakes or data silos, let's call it data silos because that's what it really is. The data silos within the telcos are not ready to unleash the full potential of AI. The AI that telcos have done so far is more structured data. The unstructured data and assembling that and doing all of that, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Even on the structured data side, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And then between those silos, you have to drop the walls between those silos in some cases to do things like agentic AI. So the OSS systems might need to talk to the BSS systems, which need to talk to the customer care agents so that they can provide the appropriate level of support to the customer calling into the call center with a good KPI, right? There needs to be a lot more work on this. And this is actually an area where the consultancies and the systems integration companies, there is a tremendous opportunity here to help the telcos get their data prepped and optimized for use with AI. Mike, did you have anything to add to that?
Sure. So I think one of the reasons that we see more of a presence at MWC for management consultancy companies is for this reason, because the telcos need to clean up their data to get it ready, to take full advantage of AI. So I think that's a key trend to watch in the industry.
So the next question is about 6G again. Is there any talk of 6G in the next 5 years? So there was some talk about 6G, but I do want to be very realistic here. Everybody that I've talked to, and I'm pretty sure that Mike's talked to as well, had to give a level set on 6G. And the level set is, we've done 4G, we didn't get the return that we needed. We did 5G, hoping that it was going to be different, and it wasn't. Why would 6G be any different? And by the way, we don't have enough money to do a forklift upgrade to 6G like we've done now for the prior generations. So even if there's a will to do it, there might not be the capital available to support it. So there is a real level set among the telcos around how would we even do 6G? Where would it make sense? We have to be much more tactical with it this time around. We need to be very careful and cognizant of ROI before we spend any significant amount of money on it. That's a broad statement, but that is covering, I would think that covers all the bases of the conversations I've had about that topic. Mike, you have anything to add?
No, that's fair.
One thing I will say about 6G, though, is I think that it's actually going to be enterprises that lead with 6G, because they may have use cases that justify investment. So I would be looking at that as a potential catalyst for some 6G spend. So it may not be led by the telcos for the 6G. It may be we see 6G featuring prominently in private network solutions. That's a very real possibility. Someone asked about getting the recording of the session. I believe this session will be, recording will be made available. We'll also provide the special report that I talked about. The next question is, what are the opportunities you see for systems integrators working with the telcos? Do you see them as a bridge between telcos and other industry verticals? Yes, we do. CNSI companies, we see a lot of opportunity, but the opportunities are really going to get green-lighted if there's a clear path to a business outcome. So what I mean by that is pet projects and projects that have questionable or uncertain outcomes, those ones are going to be tabled or canceled outright in most cases. The projects that have a clear line of sight to an outcome in terms of new revenue or cost reduction or productivity enhancement or those types of things. If there's a solution or a project that can help the telco achieve those more tactically oriented outcomes, those we think are going to get green lighted, and the CNSI companies are going to be winning the vast majority of that business.